Hillcrest Church video. We hope this message will help you grow.
So we are continuing our Isaiah series today. We're going to be in Isaiah 55. So if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, you start flipping there now. Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, is over halfway through the Bible, chapter 55. But before we get there this morning, I wanted to share something happened to me a couple weeks ago. So a few weeks ago, my brother Gabe, I invited him to come out. He flew out Memorial Day weekend, and the idea was for us to climb Mount Baker together. So he came out, and he came on Thursday. And do you remember what that weekend was like? That Friday and Saturday, it was really wet and rainy. And so Thursday he gets here, and we're looking at the weather forecast, and we're thinking, oh, this may not be the weekend to do it after all. And we're thinking about going up on the glacier and being in the clouds and 40-degree rain and setting up our tent in the rain and cooking in the rain and getting up the next morning and going up in the whiteout fog in the rain. And we're like, this isn't going to be that. So we decided to change what we're going to do, and we're going to go to one of these fire lookouts. Have you heard about there's these fire lookouts around the state of Washington? They used to, look for forest fires, but now hikers can go and stay in them. So we thought, okay, instead we'll go, and that way maybe we'll be hiking in the rain, but then we can be nice and dry at night, get all dried off. It'll be great. So we find this one, Hidden Lake Lookout, and we decide it's my brother and I, and then my friend Justin, but it's first come, first serve. And so we head up Friday morning, and we get to the trailhead early. We're like, we're going to beat everybody up there and get it for ourselves. And we start going, but there's another car ahead of us. So we knew there are a couple people on the trail ahead of us who they were going to get there first. So, we had to try and catch them. And because it's like, we want to get to this. So we're going, and we get out of the woods, and we're up above tree line, and it's just snow, right? We're just going up this gully, post-holing in the snow, and just marching. It's raining on us. And we've been going for an hour and a half or something, and then these two people are coming down the mountain towards us. And we're thinking, this is, those are the people ahead of us. What are they doing coming down? And they stop. They're like, hey. We're like, hey. And they say, there's a bear that was coming after us, so we're out of here. And so naturally, we look at each other, and we're like, yes. Not only do we get first dibs, we might get to see a bear. So we're going, and we're making all sorts of notes. We're being safe, like, hey, bear, and banging things around, We never do see it. But we get up there, and we get way up above tree line. It's just these snow fields, no landmarks, and it's all, you can see what it's all socked in with clouds. You're in the clouds, and it's raining, and we are going, and it is like we're going hour after hour. And we know we're headed towards this fire lookout. We're just like, when are we going to find this place? We are slogging through the snow. We're getting cold and wet. Everything is just drenched and just snow up to our knees, our thighs. And we're like, we just want to get there and get dried off, get our dry clothes on, make it cut something warm to drink. And we're just like, we want to get to this fire lookout. So the time is going on, and at a certain point, it goes from just fun times marching around in the snow to we are lost in the clouds, in the snowfield. We can't find this place. We are getting really cold. My fingers went numb. And my brother, his foot's going up. We're like, when are we going to? And so we're going, and we're thinking, either we need to find this place the next mile or so, or we need to, abort mission. And so we're going, and we're like, okay, now we really got to find this place. And all of a sudden, my brother, we're going through this deep snow, thigh-deep snow. All of a sudden, my brother goes, I lost my shoe. We're like, what? You did what? He's like, it just, my foot was numb, and the snow just slurped it off. And I don't know, and he didn't even know where he lost it. And we turn around, and there's just footprints in deep snow. We're like, what? So, this is not an ideal. We're like, you sit on a rock, because you don't want to stand in the snow in your socks at that point. And then Justin, he goes to look for the fire look. I'm like, you go ahead, follow these because we've been following footsteps. See if you can find it. I'm going to just dig around and see if I can't find my brother's shoe. So half hour, I'm digging around. He's sitting there. Justin finally comes back. He's like, I cannot find the lookout. And I'm like, I can't find the shoe. And so we just put dry socks on Gabe, wrap all these plastic grocery bags around his foot, tape it all on there, and then we just abort mission and go down and go look for a burger place. We're like, we are out of here. We just can't, we failed is what happened. But this, have you ever been, we're up there and we're just cold and wet and we just want to find this lookout. We want to get dry, we want to get warm, we want to make a warm, something to drink. And like, have you ever just wanted something so bad you could taste it? Like you just want this thing. And like the compass of our hearts was pointed at this fire lookout. It would have been nice if we had an actual GPS pointed at it, but that's another story altogether. But like that's like our heart was just pointed at it. And I think this is a picture of what is actually true about how we live, how we journey through life. Like I think our hearts, we have things that our hearts long for. I mean, in other words, like when you think about your life, what is the fire lookout of your life? Because we're all moving towards something. Like something is directing the direction we're going. Like what is your heart, the compass of your heart, what is it pointed at? Like what is this, like the deep longings of your heart, the deep desires that like shape all sorts of decisions? What are they directed at? And I don't just, because there's surface stuff that we want at a surface level. I want new soccer cleats, or I want to go on this vacation, or like there's these surface things, but there are these deep longings that drive us along. Like I want the pain to stop. Like I want to get answers. Like what is the truth about this question I keep asking? Like I don't want to be alone. Like I want to have a family. I want to be seen as successful in school or in sports or in work. Like we have these deep longings that shape our lives, that shape the direction. And so for you, what are those deep longings? Like what is that fire lookout that your heart is pointed at? This morning, we're going to look at this text in Isaiah 55. It talks about desire and longing and spirituality and where God meets people in it. And I want to just bring this question of our longings and listen to what God says to his people in the book of Isaiah. See if it doesn't speak to us about our longings. And so if you haven't flipped there yet, why don't you head to Isaiah 55. And just before we read it, I want to set just a little bit of the scene for us. In the book of Isaiah so far, God has been speaking to his people, and here in Isaiah 55, he's actually addressing his people while they're in exile. So they're not living in their homeland. They're living in this foreign land in Babylon. They've been kind of collectively kidnapped. They're in exile. They've been there for decades. And the reason they've been there for decades is that the people of God, their ancestors who had been living in the promised land, had collectively turned their backs on God. They collectively pursued idolatry and injustice. And God had said, I need to wake you up from this destructive path you're on. I'm going to allow you to be taken into exile. And so the people have been taken into exile. They've lived in this situation in Babylon for decades. And I'm sure they had these longings to go home and longings not to be on the margins of society anymore, longings to get back to their family or extended family reunited. And God's speaking to them. And just before 55, in kind of 40 through 53, those chapters of Isaiah, God has spoken to them about this figure called the servant. And we did some messages back before Easter on the suffering servant. And essentially God has said to these people in exile, he said this. He said, I know that you're in this situation of exile and you are far from me spiritually, but I'm going to send this mysterious servant figure who will in some ways represent me and in some ways represent you. And the servant will come and speak the truth and will rely on me and trust in me and will follow the Spirit and will invite all kinds of people to me. And this servant will live justice and speak rightly. And this servant will actually end up being rejected and shamed and humiliated and abandoned and beaten and killed. And that somehow through the suffering of this servant will make a way for you, my people, to spiritually come home to me. Because that is what God wants. He wants his people to come home and spiritually be right with him. And so what happens then, it all comes to like this climax in chapter 53, and then after 53 in the book of Isaiah, the implications of the servant making a way home to God for the people, the implications like explode out like a supernova. There's all these implications of what this means now about the people being able to come home and be right with God, about all sorts of other nations being invited to know God, about the community being reshaped to rightly worship and rightly treat the vulnerable in their midst, and all this stuff kind of works out. So today we're going to start looking at kind of like one ray of the supernova, one implication that now that the servant has made a way home, what does that mean? And so we're going to pick up at what, now that the servant has made a way home, what does God say to his people? And so Isaiah 55, beginning in verse 1, this is what God says. God speaks to his people in exile and says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. See, I have made him a witness to the peoples, a ruler and commander of the peoples. Surely you will summon nations you know not, and nations you do not know will come running to you because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. So God speaks these words to his people in exile, and the gist of it is pretty straightforward. Essentially, because the servant has made a way for the people to spiritually come home to God, God now approaches them, not shaking his finger at them, but he just comes, asking them to come home. Come to me, he says. Come home. Come back to me. And in fact, when you come back to me, what will happen when you come back to me is that it'll be such a beautiful thing that all sorts of other peoples and nations will come joining in and come to me as well. It's this invitation by God to his people to come back to him. But what I want to key in on with you this morning is I want to just look at this idea of how longing, how desire works in this text, and how God speaks to his people about their longings and how that interacts with their relationship with God. So I want to just talk about longing. So let's just look a little bit at how longing works. The passage begins, and it says in verse 1, it says, "Come all you who are thirsty." And so it begins, and God is assuming that the people he speaks to have longings in their life. They're thirsty. I mean, it's not literally talking about they need water, but there's these deep things that they want. And he says, "Come all who are thirsty." And the idea is that God is going to, he goes on to say, "You come to the waters, you have no money, come buy and eat." And God says, I desire to see these longings in your life met. So they have desires. God desires to meet them in those things. And then verse 2, we get this picture that it says, "Why spend money on what is not bread?" So clearly, these people have, in some way, these longings. They've been pursuing things that won't actually satisfy them. They've been pursuing things that won't actually fill up their hearts. And then God says, "Listen to me and eat what is good." God says, I don't just I'm not just trying to fill up the basic requirements. I'm not going to just give you bread and water. I want to meet your deep longings in a way that will delight your soul. Like I desire to delight your heart of hearts. And then in verse 3, verse 3 is really where it's kind of the key that turns the lock. Because in verse 3, the whole time God's been working with this metaphor of food and good food and water. And then in verse 3, we see what he's actually talking about. It says, give ear and come to me. See, God's not actually talking to them about literal food and literal water. God's not even talking to them about kind of things God could do for them. Like, I can do this for you, or I can do that for you. God is talking to them about God's self. He's saying, what you long for, I desire to meet the deep longings in your life. And the way I'm going to do that is I am going to give you myself. That the best gift God could ever give to anyone is God's self. An encounter with the living and transcendent one. God says, he says, come to me, and I will be the water for your soul. Come to me, I will be the food your heart is craving for. Come to me, I am the refuge in the snowfield. Come to me, I am the warm fire and the hot drink. Come to me, I am what your heart has been craving. Come to me, all who are thirsty. God's speaking to them about their desires and claiming that they will find them met in him. And I found myself really, provoked by this idea, this invitation over these last few weeks. This idea that the delight, like the greatest delight that my soul was made for, is the experience of God, Father, Son, and Spirit. And that the best thing that God could give me is an encounter with God himself. Like, I've been really provoked by that. I've been in Isaiah, but I also took a class up at Regent a couple weeks ago that really dovetailed with some of these ideas. The title of the class was Reordering Desire, Augustine, Queer Theory, and Christian Sexual Ethics. And it was as fascinating as it sounds like it might be. And but one of the things we did for the class was we read Confessions by Augustine. It's a great new translation, if you've never read it, by Sarah Rudin, who just does a really good job of putting it in modern parlance. Like, it's easy to read. Some of the older translations are just a lot of these and thous and that kind of stuff. But Sarah does a great job. I'd encourage it. Confessions and Augustine in general, one of the most influential. If you don't know, Augustine was like 300 or 400 years after Jesus, a Christian theologian, and probably has done as much as anyone after Jesus. He's done as much to shape Christian theology and how people think about Jesus. And in fact, just even apart from Christianity, there are a few figures who have done more to shape how in the modern West we conceive of individual identity. Like Confession sets the trajectory for that. So if you've never read it, I encourage you to do so. But one of the things Augustine really walks in the tradition of Isaiah in this understanding that God is meant to be the delight of our hearts. Augustine really understands what Isaiah was getting at, that our hearts, like they long ultimately for the transcendent God of the universe. He's got this famous prayer at the beginning of Confessions, and he starts off with this prayer, and he says, this is Augustine praying to God. He says, "You made us with yourself as our goal, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." The only true rest or peace or like sense of rightness and wholeness, like that comes from being within God, being in relationship with God, and that ultimately that when we pursue that, we express that longing and chase after all other sorts of things, it will always leave us unsettled, restless. Another place on the same theme, Augustine writes this. talking about the happy or joyful life, and not happiness at a shallow level, but like at a deep soul level. Augustine writes, happiness is to rejoice in you, God, and for you, and because of you. This is true happiness, and there is no other. Those who think that there is another kind of happiness look for joy elsewhere, but theirs is not true joy. And this idea that like God, we are designed in a way that our deep longings point towards the transcendent God who made us and made all things, that he is meant to be the delight of our souls, and that sometimes those longings get redirected at all sorts of other things, but those other things will ultimately leave us unsatisfied. God, the greatest gift God can give is God's self to us. And so I wonder, I've been challenged to think about, I asked earlier, what are the deep longings of your life? And I've been challenged to think about, in my own life, like, what do the deep longings in my heart, how are they pointing towards things that God desires to meet in me? And I encourage you to reflect on that. Like, how might those deep aches in your life actually point towards the living God and things that the transcendent God desires to meet in you? That we have these things that, if I just found this, I would be happy. We have these longings. Like, we all recognize we have them. And it's not, I don't want to, there's a way of saying this wrongly I'm not saying either or. Like, you can imagine a situation where someone is profoundly lonely, and they say, Tim, I long for friends. And I'm not saying that you say to that person, oh, you don't need friends, you just need God, and that's all you need. Like, that's not helpful or true. Like, it's okay. Like, it's not either or, God or these things. But there is a sense that if you believe that finding those friends will totally make you happy and fulfilled and you don't need anything else, that is not true. And there is something that you might be looking for in those friendships that God is saying to you, I desire to meet that longing in your heart. That there's these deeper things. And we have these deep longings, and I believe God wants to speak to us about them. And I would just encourage us this morning, even as we continue to talk, but just for you to think about your longings and kind of to think with some curiosity about how might you actually be craving for God in those things. This can work itself out in ways that are quite dysfunctional and destructive, or quite, to the outside world, respectable. Right? So, for example, it can work its way out in some destructive ways. That people, and we know, we have friends who they are longing for the pain or the anxiety or the sadness to be healed, to go away. And so they look to pills or wine or meth or pot out of these cravings, these longings. And I wonder that they might not recognize that God might be saying to them, I desire to be the healing for your pain and the safe place in your anxiety. That it's actually expressing a longing for God. I wonder about those of us that we look to pornography or fantasizing about affairs or pursuing affairs. And there are these longings for intimacy and connection and being known, that God might not be saying, you are looking for something like, I desire to be your unconditional love. Come to me. These longings are actually expressing a deeper thing that God desires to meet in us. They can be expressed in destructive, they can be expressed in really, quote, ways that look good. Like, we can have longings for, I desire to be successful in sports, or to be admired for my work, or I desire to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or someone to spend my life with, or I desire to give my kids a different childhood than I had, or I just desire to have kids. We can have these longings in our life. And I wonder how God might not be speaking to us and saying that there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But if you're telling yourself that we can tell ourselves that I will finally be happy when I get that. I think God might say to us, that's not true. You only be finally happy in me. Like the joy and delight of your soul is ultimately found in me. And it's not that there's anything wrong with desiring some of those things, but you're actually looking for something in them that is meant to be found in me. And I think God says to us, come to me, you are thirsty. Drink. You who are hungry, and eat. Come to me who are long for intimacy and find love. Come to me who long for success and find glory. Come to me who long for escape and find refuge. Come to me. And this, God makes this appeal to his people. And God does this. God has made this appeal to his people over and over and over and over again throughout human history, drawing people to himself, inviting people to know him. He did this through Isaiah. He did this through Isaiah to those in exile. To those in exile that we just read, he says, come to me. I desire to be the delight of your heart. Centuries later, 5 or 6 centuries later, a young Jewish prophet named Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, shows up. And Jesus says things like, I think we have this next slide here. He says like, anyone who is thirsty, come to me and drink. Just imagine for a culture saturated in the words of Isaiah, how that would ring in people's ears when Jesus claimed that about himself. Jesus later on, he says, I am the bread of life. It's the same thing. I desire to draw you to myself and be the delight of your hearts. Today we're celebrating Pentecost Sunday, when the Spirit comes on the followers of Jesus and fills up their hearts and their souls. And then what happens? People from all sorts of nations come running to hear about Jesus. It's exactly what we read about the nations will come running to you. Today, in this morning's service, we saw how God continues to do this in baptisms. In the 11 o'clock service, we did a baptism in the 9 o'clock service. We are seeing people who are saying that it's this living picture of I have tried other things, and I did not find the delight of my soul there. And so I go in the waters, and I give my life to Jesus because, Jesus, I believe you are the delight of my soul. It is a picture of that. We heard that in those stories. And we aren't, like anybody who's walked with Jesus for any amount of time, we aren't so naive to believe this is just kind of like a one-time flip the switch, and now we're, the happy light's always on, or something like we understand that it's working at a much deeper level, right? That it's this process of over and over again throughout our lives, God speaking to us as we long for it, we desire and we look and we think that's what's going to finally make me happy. That's finally going to give me peace. And God over and over again speaking to us and saying, come to me, you, when you're thirsty. Come to me when you're hungry. I am the one that your heart will ultimately find delight in. The best thing I could ever give you is myself. And it's coming to him and allowing him to do that work in our hearts over and over and over again. And it's him doing the work in us. Like, we can't make that happen. You can't just I don't really feel like I'm excited about God today, but I'm going to grit my teeth and then I will, right? It doesn't, it's this really organic that and even as we move back into worship here in just a moment, I would invite us to be aware of what your deep longing, what are the desires that are driving you along. Recognize that. And then with some curiosity before God, say, God, in what way do you desire to meet me in this? In what way are you meant to satisfy this desire? And to bring that before him and let him speak to you about that. And then invite him into that. God, right now I don't even want you, but I want to want you more. God, would you send your Spirit and begin shaping my heart to rightly point these longings at you? Because I think that's what's most true, but I need your help to get there. And invite God into that place. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to worship together. We're going to pray together as we move towards the end of the service. And I'd invite you with some holy curiosity to set your longings in front of God and ask him how he might desire to meet those things in your life. Let's pray. Abba, Father, you said to your people in exile, come to me, all who are thirsty. Jesus, you came and walked this earth. You said very similar words. Anyone who is thirsty, come to me and drink. Spirit, we believe you're here, extending that invitation all over again. And I would just ask for us in this room, that in the real stuff of our lives, like the real aches, not kind of the imaginary stuff, but in the real aches of our heart of hearts, would you speak to us this morning about how you, living God, desire to meet us in those places in ways that nothing else in this world can. Our ears are open. Our hearts are open. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for connecting with Hillcrest Church. For more info on this and other sermons, visit us online at hcbellingham.com or join us at 9 or 11 a.m. any Sunday morning, 1400 Larrabee Ave, Bellingham, Washington.